There is an encrypted flash drive sitting on my desk right now. It contains a sequence of 6 thermal photographs. The first 4 frames show exactly what the drone was meant to capture, the glowing heat signature of a lone man navigating a freezing, fog-choked ridge in Central Africa. But the 5th frame reveals something else entirely. It catches the exact fraction of a second before the man realizes he is not alone. It is a chilling piece of evidence proving that out in the deepest parts of the wilderness, there are things that have learned exactly how to exploit our blind spots. Things that know how to walk right in our shadows. But the most terrifying part of this file isn't what the drone caught on camera. It's how those 6 photographs became a step-by-step preview of the pilot's own brush with death. 3 weeks ago, I received a heavily taped bubble mailer at my P.O. box. There was no return address. Inside was that encrypted drive, its decryption password sent to my secure email via an anonymous server earlier that week, and a 6-page typewritten letter. I get a lot of strange mail doing this channel. Most of it is fiction, but the man who sent this included a separate folder containing his credentials. He provided redacted copies of his commercial drone pilot licenses, his geospatial analysis certifications, and employment contracts proving he spent 4 years working for a massive wildlife conservation NGO in Central Africa. He blacked out his personal details to protect his identity, but he left the NGO contract IDs and sector mapping authorizations intact. I am not going to name the specific organization for legal reasons, but I had someone familiar with the conservation space look at the paperwork. They told me that if this is a hoax, it's a professional one. The timelines, the terminology, and the flight logs match the region's geography perfectly. The man asked me to refer to him simply as the pilot. What follows is his account, exactly as he wrote it. And as you listen, keep the poacher in those photographs in the back of your mind, because soon enough, the pilot will find himself standing right in his footprints. People think cameras capture the truth. As a geospatial analyst, I can tell you they don't. A standard optical camera captures light, which means it captures shadows, illusions, and tricks of the environment. If you want the cold, undeniable biological reality of what is breathing in a forest, you do not use light. You use thermal radiation. You measure the world in Kelvin. For the last 4 years, I piloted enterprise-grade mapping drones for a conservation NGO. We mapped the most inaccessible wilderness on the African continent, flying automated grid patterns at night using high-resolution radiometric sensors. It was clinical, repetitive work, until the Ruwenzori contract. The Ruwenzori Mountains border Uganda and the Congo. They are often called the Mountains of the Moon. To understand this story, you have to understand this environment. It is an equatorial alpine ecosystem that looks entirely prehistoric. It's a world of jagged peaks and deep, suffocating valleys choked with freezing mist. The plant life is alien. Giant lobelias that grow 20 feet tall, looking like spiked triffids. And beneath the plants, there is the mud, deep, black, freezing peat bogs. The muck is thick and relentless, sitting boot-deep across the valleys, hiding sudden, deeper depressions that can swallow a man's leg and hold his foot like a vacuum. Visibility is effectively zero. The sea of fog is so thick it dampens the air itself. When I arrived at the Ugandan base camp, I was assigned a team of Bakonzo guides, local mountaineers who have navigated those peaks for centuries. On the first morning, I noticed a strange detail. Every single guide had a cluster of small, irregular brass bells tied tightly to their bootlaces. "To keep the leopards away," I asked Elias, the head guide. Elias looked up at the thick canopy of mist hiding the valleys. "Leopards do not come up this high," he said quietly. "The bells are to break the rhythm." When I pressed him, Elias told me about the Kikomba. He didn't speak of it as a spirit or a demon, but with the grim, practical annoyance of a farmer discussing a starving wolf. He described a massive, bipedal ape that lives exclusively in the deepest, most fog-choked bogs of the range. Elias explained that the Kikomba normally hunts by smell, hearing, and terrain familiarity. But when the heavy fog sits low and wet in the valleys for days, the mountain goes dead. Everything is muffled, scent gets washed out and scattered by the moisture. Normal hunting becomes inefficient and impossible. So, the Kikomba switches strategy. It goes to the one thing that still moves predictably: human paths. But it has a problem. The Kikomba cannot just charge humans openly. Humans carry rifles, poachers, soldiers, guides. We are all armed. If a massive, heavy creature comes crashing blindly through the brush, a man will simply turn, raise his rifle, and fire. The Kikomba knows this. It has adapted around our only advantage in the fog. In the thick mist, you cannot see, Elias explained. If an animal hides in the bushes, you still hear the leaves moving. The Kikomba does not hide in the bushes. It hides in your own sound. Elias said that the creature stalks its prey by locking onto the acoustic rhythm of their footsteps. If you walk, it walks. It steps exactly when you step, hiding the heavy impact of its weight perfectly inside the acoustic shadow of your own boots in the mud. Elias claimed it carefully places its massive feet into the compressed footprints you just left behind, perfectly syncing its speed with yours. By the time you realize your footsteps sound just a little too heavy, the Kikomba is already standing directly in your blind spot. It has learned to perfectly mimic the wet sound of a boot in the mud, Elias said. But it has a problem. To close the final distance and take its prey, it must leap. It cannot hide the violent sound of 1,000 pounds charging those last 10 feet. If it makes that noise on flat ground, a man will turn and shoot. So it stalks you in the blind fog, maintaining its distance. It waits until you reach a steep ravine, a treacherous cliff, or a deep bog. It waits until your eyes and your mind are entirely consumed by navigating the mountain. When your attention is thoroughly distracted by your next step, that is when it takes you. It cannot mimic the random, chaotic chime of brass. If the bell rings, it cannot hide. But if you walk in the valley without bells, you give it the rhythm it needs to follow you to your end. I wrote it off as local folklore. I was there to fly drones, not chase Bigfoot. It was an arrogant, fatal miscalculation. I had no idea that in just a few short weeks I would find myself wandering into the fog, giving the creature the exact rhythm it needed. 2 weeks later, my data proved Elias right. We were mapping Grid Sector 4, a remote valley near the Congolese border. Because thick valley fog renders thermal imaging useless, resulting in a flat, featureless grey wall on the monitor, we had to wait for breaks in the weather to fly. Up at that altitude, there is no such thing as a perfectly clear night, but the forecast promised a rare window of relatively thin mist. So, I launched the drone. But those mountains make their own weather. Halfway through the automated flight, a massive, unexpectedly dense fog bank rolled up from the Congolese side, rapidly swallowing the lower elevations. By 2 a.m., the mist was nearly 100 feet deep. Sector 4 includes a massive, narrow spine of rock that rises 100 feet above the valley floor. It was the only thing still poking out above the heaviest layers of the fog like a bridge, providing the exact geometric contrast the software needed. The drone flew its automated path over this exposed ridge, snapping overlapping thermal images at a 45-degree oblique angle exactly once every second. The next morning, I ran the images through our software. It flagged a sequence of 6 frames. In the first frame, the thermal palette was set to white hot. Against the freezing, pitch-black rock of the ridge, there was a bright white heat signature, a man. I could clearly see the distinct silhouette of a rifle passing across his glowing body as his arms moved. Likely a poacher using the exposed ridge to cross the border quickly. That's our subject A. I clicked to the second frame, taken 1 second later. Because the drone was flying forward, its field of view advanced just enough to capture a new figure emerging from the steep fog bank right at the top edge of the photograph. Subject B. When I first saw Subject B, my pulse spiked. Based on the spatial metadata, the poacher was roughly 5'9". Subject B was easily 8 feet tall. The sheer volume of heat radiating from its core suggested a walking tank of an animal. I clicked to the third and fourth frames. Subject B was exactly 10 feet behind the poacher. I overlaid the sequence of frames. By calculating their stride length and spatial displacement across the images, the telemetry proved a flawless synchronization. The creature wasn't just following him out of the fog, its gait cycle perfectly mirrored the poacher's. Then came frame 5. The poacher stopped at the lip of the ridge. Because of the angled camera lens, I could see his silhouette crouched low, contemplating his descent into the fog, entirely preoccupied with figuring out his next move. The massive creature froze mid-stride, hovering just 10 feet behind him, taking advantage of that exact moment of total distraction. I stared at frame 5 for hours that morning. I memorized the posture of a man entirely unaware that he was about to die. I didn't know it then, but studying this exact frame is the only reason I am alive today. In frame 6, the poacher's distinct silhouette was gone. He had been engulfed by the massive, glowing white shape of Subject B. The creature was a blurred, violent streak, dragging the man off the exposed rock and down into the deep, foggy brush below. Across the freezing stone where the poacher had just been standing, the camera captured a bright, fresh smear of residual heat. A thermal drag mark. Between frame 5 and frame 6, exactly 1 second had passed. In 1 single second, this 1,000-pound animal closed a 10-foot gap, neutralized an armed man, and dragged him off the ridge. I quarantined the Sector 4 data that morning and told my bosses the files were corrupted. There was no body to recover, and I didn't go to the police. Instead, I extracted the spatial telemetry and motion tracking data and sent it to a biologist who studies primate behavior in Central Africa as an anonymized behavioral simulation, asking him to analyze a scenario where an armed human is stalked in a zero-visibility fog environment. His reply offered no comfort. Assuming this telemetry data isn't a theoretical exercise, the mechanics here are terrifying. This isn't just instinct. This implies deep predatory intelligence. It knows its prey is visually blind in the fog, but still armed. So, rather than risking a charge, it has learned to mimic the rhythm of human footsteps. It uses an extreme form of acoustic mirroring to bypass auditory threat detection. And, astoundingly, it possesses the discipline to maintain that stalk until the terrain forces the prey to drop their guard. It is horrifyingly smart. I should have requested a transfer right then, but the project was almost finished, and I told myself I was safe as long as I stayed in base camp. But studying a monster on a computer screen is one thing. Being forced out into the fog with it is another. 3 weeks later, my secondary drone suffered a catastrophic telemetry failure and dropped out of the sky into the deep Lobelia Valley just over a mile from camp. I was about to play out the exact same terrifying sequence I had just watched on my monitor. The radiometric sensor payload it carried was worth $40,000. Company protocol was rigid: retrieve the payload, no matter what. I approached Elias, but the afternoon sun was already sinking and the thick grey sea of fog was spilling over the ridges. "No," Elias said flatly. "The fog is dropping. The valley belongs to the Kikomba after dark." Elias held out a cluster of brass bells, his face grim. I was angry and arrogant. I brushed his hand away. It was already late and every minute mattered. I had a GPS tablet that could lead me straight to the drone, and I felt that saving time, minimizing how long I would be moving through the valley in the dark, was the safest option. Tying the bells into my laces would only waste precious time. The hike down took an hour. The fog was incredibly dense, limiting visibility to 15 feet. The ground was a nightmare of thick, sucking peat. Every step required effort. Squelch, pull, step, squelch. I reached the coordinates just as the last ambient light bled out of the sky. The drone had buried itself deep in the mud. I had to drop to my knees and dig it out with my bare hands, plunging my arms into the freezing muck to secure the thermal sensor in my waterproof pack. Covered in slime, I turned back up the mountain. By now, the darkness was absolute. My high-lumen headlamp just hit the wall of white moisture and reflected a blinding sphere of light back at me. Beyond 15 feet, there was only pitch-black fog. The silence in the valley felt pressurized. The only sound in the entire world was the wet, rhythmic sound of my own boots in the mud. I had been hiking for 20 minutes when I noticed it. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the kind of thing you would never notice unless you were actively concentrating on the sound of the mud. But as I listened, there was a strange, resonant quality to my footsteps. It felt as though my boots were displacing just a little too much water, carrying more weight than my 180-pound frame could generate, a heavy, unnatural suction hiding perfectly underneath the wet smack of the mud. My heart gave a slow, painful throb. I remembered frame 3. Subject B is exactly 10 feet behind Subject A. I kept walking, forcing my eyes forward. I told myself it was just a localized echo, but the fear was spreading through my chest. I needed to know. I kept walking, counting my strides. On the 5th step, instead of taking a full stride, I took a sudden, short half step and abruptly locked my knees, freezing completely still. Behind me, the echo did not stop. Right behind me, exactly 10 feet away beyond the veil of the fog, there was the wet, violent sound of 1,000 pounds of muscle desperately trying to arrest its own momentum. A massive foot slid in the mud, displacing a terrifying amount of water. Then, absolute, suffocating silence. The air behind me suddenly smelled like wet copper, rotting vegetation, and a feral musk so primal it made my eyes water. I did not turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to snap my head around, raise my light, and illuminate the threat. But I knew if I did, the illusion of the hunt would break. That's when I realized I was in frame 5. The poacher in frame 5 had hesitated at an edge, his attention naturally absorbed by the steep descent, leaving him oblivious and vulnerable to a strike. But I hadn't just paused to check my footing. I had frozen abruptly in the middle of a flat path, and because of that, the creature had failed to stop in time. It had slipped. It knew it made a loud, wet sound in the mud. And because I didn't move, it knew I was listening. It didn't strike me because it thought I was standing there in the black fog with a gun raised, waiting for whatever made that sound to charge. It was trapped by its own intelligence. It needed me to relax. It needed me to take that next step, to resume my march and prove I had dismissed the noise before it felt safe enough to continue the stalk. My breath shuddered in my throat. I stood perfectly still for an eternity. The creature stood perfectly still behind me, waiting for its cue. I was a mile from camp. The freezing temperatures would kill me long before it got bored, but if I started walking, I was ringing the dinner bell. If I hit a deep pocket of mud, tripped over a root, or broke my rhythm for a fraction of a second, frame 6 would become my reality. Slowly, agonizingly, I took a step. Squelch. Instantly, perfectly matched to my movement, that heavy resonance returned. If you didn't concentrate on it, you wouldn't notice it. But now that I was fixated on it, I could hear the unnatural density hiding right inside the sound of my own footprint. We walked like this for 20 minutes, a grotesque, synchronized march through the black fog. The freezing mist clung to my skin like ice. The psychological torture of feeling that massive weight striking the earth exactly 10 feet behind my heels, knowing I could do absolutely nothing but keep walking, was shattering my mind. It could have crushed me at any moment, but I finally understood why it hadn't. Elias's warning echoed in my head. It cannot hide the final charge. It needs you distracted. It was waiting for me to hit an obstacle. It was waiting for me to look away from the threat behind me and focus on surviving the terrain ahead. I knew I wouldn't make it. My legs were burning, and worse, just ahead through the mist, I could see the black silhouette of a steep, treacherous incline between two massive boulders. The moment I broke my rhythm to climb, the moment my attention shifted to scaling that rock, it would close the gap. If it was going to strike, it would be there. I was running out of flat ground. I needed a sound it couldn't mimic, and I needed it now. Maintaining my agonizing metronomic stride, I forced my trembling hand into my pocket. I kept my smartphone pressed tight against my ribs, hiding the screen's glow from the fog. My hands were slick with freezing, mineral-rich mud from digging out the drone, rendering the touchscreen useless. Fighting desperately to keep my rhythm, I awkwardly wiped my thumb raw on the dry fabric inside my jacket pocket. My hand was shaking so violently I had to punch in my PIN by muscle memory to bypass the lock screen. I blindly mashed the massive widget on my home screen for my heavy metal workout playlist, a chaotic, aggressive wall of screaming guitars, blast beat drums, and irregular time signatures, pure, unadulterated artificial noise. I took a deep breath, fumbled the volume rocker to its absolute maximum, and hit play. The tiny speaker pierced the freezing fog. The dense moisture immediately dampened the volume, but the stillness of the prehistoric valley was instantly shattered by a tinny, erratic wall of distorted noise. The effect was violent. Right behind me, the Kikomba let out a booming shriek of absolute sensory overload. It wasn't that the phone was deafeningly loud, it was the sheer, unnatural, alien chaos of the sound. To a predator whose brain had learned to hyper-focus on the subtle, rhythmic patterns of human movement, a wall of distorted, digital, high-frequency noise was an acoustic flashbang. Its neurological lock on my footsteps was shattered. It was disoriented, terrified, and exposed. Right then, in that moment, I ran. I didn't sprint. Sprinting was impossible in the sucking, boot-deep mud. Instead, I scrambled recklessly, tearing my way blindly through the brush, stumbling in and out of the hidden depressions and dragging myself over the slippery rocks. Behind me, the massive creature thrashed in the brush, its perfect, silent cadence replaced by the panicked crashing of a 1,000-pound animal blinded by noise. It smashed into a giant lobelia, snapping the thick trunk like a gunshot. The heavy metal track blared from my hand like a shield as I fled. I didn't stop until I saw the yellow glow of the base camp lanterns. I collapsed in the mud, chest heaving, the music crackling from my mud-caked phone. Elias and the guides rushed out with rifles. Elias didn't ask where the drone was. He just reached down, turned off my phone, and ordered the men to build the fires as high as they would go. I quit the NGO the second I got off that mountain. I handed over the recovered payload at their regional headquarters, packed my bags, and booked the first flight out of the country. And because I had already told my bosses that the first drone's files were corrupted, no one ever asked for the Sector 4 data. I took the drive with me and never looked back. The next time you are hiking alone in the deep woods, walking along a quiet trail, and you suddenly notice that the sound of your own footsteps carries just a little too much weight, do not stop walking. Do not freeze, and whatever you do, do not turn around. You cannot outrun something that is already standing in your shadow. That was the end of the pilot's letter. The Ruwenzoris are one of the most untouched places left on the planet, and maybe they are untouched for a reason. If you're planning a trip into the deep wilderness anytime soon, maybe consider taking a page out of Elias's book, because if the woods go quiet, you might just be providing the rhythm for something else's hunt. Stay safe out there and don't look back.